Thank you, Sue. Good afternoon. My name is Brooke Rudolph, for those who don't know me. I have had the pleasure of working in the placer mining industry a lot over the last decade, but more recently I'm now in road construction, so bringing some of both of those worlds to today's talk. I'm bringing a lot of positivity and a little bit of heavy construction equipment. And hopefully this guy will work. We could just do next slide if that's okay. Oh, well, we'll just hold on. So I'm going to speak at the start this morning or this afternoon and give a really high level overview of where everything is from my perspective. And I think it's really important to look at the topic of the regulatory landscape, new minerals legislation, how things are assessed in assessment processes, and have a good understanding or a baseline of how that goes. So hopefully it'll be about 10 minutes of the slideshow to start. Then we'll jump into perfect. Then we'll jump into a conversation about some timelines and wish lists with regulators. Then we'll talk about new mining legislation and end with some sort of optimism. My goal is that you'll have a very high level and imperfect understanding of the current system, a better understanding of why behind some of the timeline challenges with regulators, and a better understanding on the work that new mining legislation aims to achieve. So for folks that are not from the Yukon, I apologize in advance. We are terrible with acronyms. There are bazillions. I will attempt to not use too many. I also think it's important to start at the ground floor. There's a lot of experts here, but there's probably folks that don't know everything. So there's three main types of projects in the Yukon. We've got exploration, and I'm using a bicycle on the left, yep, to represent sort of that class 1 notification type footprint. So they're walking around looking at rocks. And then we've got sort of the class 3, class 4 quartz applications, and they're more of like a camper van. They do spend more time on the land. There is a little bit more impact, but it is quite temporary. We've got placer miners. They're mostly family-based industry. 90% of placer is a family, and they do disturb the superficial ground. There's no chemicals used in the process, and we threw in a monster truck for good measure. And then quartz mining, so this is Minto mining. That can be anything subsurficial. It could be open pit. It could be underground, and those are the big operating mines. We've also got two old acts. So the PMA, the Placer Mining Act, and the QMA is the Quartz Mining Act, and they're quite old, and they're supposed to fit within the larger framework of all of the legislations, policies, and procedures, not just territorially, but also federally. And notably, we've got completed land use plans. They're supposed to fit within that framework, and we don't have a whole lot of completed land use plans. There are one that's close, I think, in Dawson, but it's in its second iteration as well. So that's a key piece of this regulatory landscape puzzle that isn't in place completely. So if anyone was here before lunch, Kent did a talk on the DO rule review. But there's really great information on the YESUB website. I do not pretend to be an expert on the process for them, but you can find this good information online. And the Yukon Water Board also has some really great things. They did a website refresh quite recently, and if you have any questions about the water licensing process, check the Water Board out. Okay, so class 1 notification, you've got your person in the hard hat, which is your proponent, and they apply to YG, and then that application goes into Big C consultation, which is a legal requirement, and once that process is complete, you have your class 1. This process is renewed annually, so if you want a class 1 notification next year, you gotta apply again. Class 2, just like a gramophone, we don't use these anymore. Class 3, Class 4 for quartz, and Class 3 placer, it's all the same process. So the proponent goes to YESUB, they're given adequacy. The IR stands for an information request, and so that's a public commentary process. And the whole project, or the whole description today is really focused on mining. And so I'm looking at how a proponent would look at the map, right? So an IR is where they're going, okay, we're going to have to, you know, have good conversations and communication with the public. Then it gets evaluated. There's an evaluation report that goes to the Yukon government. Then there's a decision document generated. Then there's additional consultation. Then a draft permit is issued. Then there's additional consultation with the affected First Nations as well as the proponent. And if that's all successful, we have a mining land use approval. And depending on which class you've applied for, it will either be a 5 or a 10-year renewal. Class 4 placer is a little bit different. So we've got the proponent that goes through the YESA process. They do the public consultation piece through the IRs. They get an evaluation report. That goes to YG. It becomes a draft decision document, which is then consulted on, but not with industry. Then there's a mining land use that is signed. It's a signed decision document, but it is not active because the Yukon Water Board has a delegated authority from the Yukon government to be the chief placer lands use. Hopefully I'm getting all these right. And what's interesting about this process is it is linear. So until you have that signed DD, the water board is probably not going to put a lot of time into looking at your application. And so from a proponent's perspective, that is part of the challenge. And then they go through the IR process, goes back to the board, who comes up with terms and conditions, and then they end up with a final water license and mining land use approval. And the water license is renewed every 10 years, depending on what the application is. The mining land use, though, has to be reapplied. And then there's a quartz mining license. And thank you to Janet on the phone, who helped edit this. There are 3 different processes that the proponent has to go through. First is the YESA assessment process, then it goes through YG, and as well as the water board. The water license is renewed every 25 years, but the land use is now just a license. So there's a lot of good information online. We've got the YESEB's YOR, the YESEB online registry. The water board has Waterline. It's a little old, but it's actually a wealth of information. There's lots of good stuff there. And then YG also has the Geo-Yukon viewer with all kinds of really good information. And that's how I came up with this. So this is a little bit confusing at first sight, but we've got, these are our regulators, and then here we've got the class 1 on the bicycles. And there's 345 active applications through class 1, and those will have to be renewed if they're going to go back and do that work again next year. There's 65 class 3 quartz, and every 5 years, all of those vehicles will loop back through, etc. I don't have to read these all to you guys. But it's the same people at the top reviewing all of these every time it loops around. And so just looking at just the government or quasi-judicial non-government bodies, we've got 68 assessors looking at that. That does not include the First Nations that are doing the consultation. That's also a tremendous amount of work on a pretty small group of people. We're also seeing over 1,000 average comments through YESA, and that's just one of the processes where the public is engaging on a project. And we have over 800 average consultation times for YG annually. So it's the same Yukoners who review every class 1, there's no 2s, but 3 and 4 for quartz and placer, as well as all the applications that are being land use or water use across the territory. Each mining proponent on the path goes through the same steps. So everybody has a familiarity with the processes and the bodies, and each piece of new information requested through the public consultation is likely to get added to the next proponent that is working in a similar way, whether that's in the same area or doing the same type of work. So every time there's a new information request, it just sort of will get tagged into future applications. Renewing a license every 1, 5, or 10 years multiplies the traffic back into the system. So we've got a lot of vehicles on a road. So now you're an expert in the regulatory process. And we're going to talk to the folks that work on the other side of the desk for mining. So do you want to start? I'm going to sit with you guys so I'm not so far away.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. That was a great overview. So yeah, for those that don't know me, my name is Kent Bretzlaff. I'm the executive director at YESEB. I've been in this role for about 3 years now. Originally, I was born on a farm on the Quebec side of Ottawa. I went to school in Guelph for water resource engineering, moved to Yellowknife, worked mainly in the diamond mine industry for surface water modeling. Jumped over here in 2017, where I worked with contaminated sites at Yukon Environment, over to the Water Board, technical advisor there for 3 years. Did a master's during COVID on Indigenous water governance with the Carcar's First Nation, and then joined YESEB as panel and hearing manager, and now ED.
Thanks, Kent. Karen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Clyde. I'm the director at the Yukon Water Board Secretariat. Been there for just under 2 years, and I've spent most of my career actually in wildlife management, and did that for 23 years with Department of Environment and worked with communities doing land claims implementation. Bounced around a little bit and ended up at the Water Board, which is it's a completely new thing for me, so it's a big, steep learning curve. That's it.
Thank you. And Janet on the phone?
My name is Janet Bell McDonald, and I'm the manager of mining land use with Mineral Resources Branch of Yukon Government. I've just stepped into this role in August, but before that, I have been with Minerals for just about 19 years in various roles, including policy. I was the mining reporter and working with frontline staff.
Thanks, Janet. And you're in Dawson today, correct?
That's correct. I'm actually based out of Dawson, so I apologize I couldn't join the group today. I unfortunately had a conflict that wouldn't allow me to travel.
All good, thank you. So I might start with you on the phone here, Janet. Can you tell us a little bit about how your processes have changed over time related to assessment and timelines?
Well, I think most people in the audience would probably recognize that mineral resources timelines have changed over the last few years, and they have gotten longer than we previously expected them to be. Court decisions and the resulting case law has changed what YG must consider as part of the consultation process. This has led to more in-depth consultation and longer time frames to issue the authorizations to accommodate that more in-depth consultation. The Yukon government takes our responsibility to consult with First Nation governments very seriously, and meeting our duty to consult helps provide more certainty for industry. And our processes have really changed over time to reflect those responsibilities. I think a big one that a lot of people will have experienced, if you've been working in the Yukon for any amount of time, you might have experienced the implementation of Class 1. It wasn't that long ago where Class 1 work did not require any kind of authorization or notification at all. And through the case law related to consultation, we have over the last 10 years implemented the Class 1 process that we have now. And we recognize that industry does have concerns about timelines for regulatory approvals, but we're really committed to making improvements to where we can while still meeting that really essential duty to consult.
Thank you, Janet. Karen, do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the changes that have happened from your perspective?
Yeah, certainly people that have worked at the Secretariat and the board longer than I have talked about this. Janet talked quite a bit about consultation. I think when I arrived on the scene, there's certainly been lots of discussion around wetlands and all of the things, understanding those and sort of what that means for placer. That's led to quite a bit of discussion at the board level. Interventions from First Nations and everybody. There's certainly, we're receiving more interventions, and they're certainly more complex, and that adds to, I think, the complexity of what the board has to consider. As far as sort of behind the scenes, the operations of the Secretariat, when I showed up, I said it's very based in the 1990s, based in paper, not a lot of digitization at all, and we do have Waterline. But we're looking to really modernize the way that we do our work and find some efficiencies because we have staff that have applications in binders, and when the board meets, we literally roll a library cart down the hall with all of these binders on it, which is wildly inefficient. So there's some behind the scenes things that definitely we need to change to improve process.
Thank you. Ken?
Yeah, I think just if we look back 32 years since the UFA was signed, 22 years since devolution, 20 years ago, YESIB's doors opened, and now we're here. Like, that's a huge amount of change for any jurisdiction, any world, any like process that we're working in. And we're a result, like everyone on this panel is a result of those monumental changes. So I think we've had all that time and the territory has changed. Add on a commodity boom, Carpe Diem, the theme of this conference. We have so many projects in, we have the renewal cycle. Like impeccably amazing interventions and arguments coming from First Nations, layered on with the fact that modern land claims haven't been fully implemented. And then just the complexity of projects and the social expectations that we're faced with. And there is polarization these days around the world on pro-mining, pro-environment, whatever your case may be. I think that all comes into YESIB current. We aren't just focusing on one small aspect, we're environmental and socioeconomic. So capturing all that with a smaller staff, we're very lucky with staff, I will recognize that, but it's huge change, and it changes by the week. And that's why we currently have our first panel review kicking off with casino. The pre-submission engagement process was brought into EC a couple of years to try and address this, and the designated office rules review is now we're at that because we need to also adapt.
So can you speak a little bit to the DO review? I know you already talked about it, but there's different folks and other things that YESIB's doing to help facilitate the timeline challenges that you are empowered to do under your legislation.
Yeah, so under our legislation, the board's able to make specific rules. One of those is making rules for designated office process. Just high level, we're reimagining how those are done after 20 years from what we've heard to make sure we can still uphold the spirit and intent of Chapter 12 and implement our neutral mandate that is federally governed. A staffing reorganization layered on top of that, categorization of assessments within the DO rules, and then new deliverables and other implementation aspects. Yeah, it's not a quick fix, which all of you in this room are living, but we are working towards that predictable process.
Well, thank you for working towards that. That's good. Karen, what are you guys doing to facilitate faster timelines that you're able to do in your lane, so to speak?
Yeah, it was, you actually mentioned it, that the Secretariat will take applications for water licenses in advance of a decision document. So that helps us to try and get ahead as best we can on doing the adequacy review. Some of the other things we're doing, we are, speaking of rules, we are going to be updating our rules in the next coming year. Some of the internal efficiencies that we're doing, the slide that was up there, we're the smallest of the three little groups. We have 13 staff. We have a couple extra people right now to help out with the placer bubble, but we are pretty small. And I took a look at the way we were structured when I got there, and I've sort of pivoted a couple of different staff positions to try and meet some other needs. So trying to find some internal efficiencies. We're working quite a bit on communications and outreach to provide good tools for people who are applying. Brooke mentioned that we did a refresh on our website. We are working on an improved water line, so that should hopefully be more user-friendly. And then one of the other things we're doing since I arrived is really focusing on, the board is an administrative tribunal, so it has to adhere to procedural fairness rules, and that in the past has sort of made it look like a bit of a black box. We can respect those rules, but we also have opportunities to do collaboration and outreach with other regulatory bodies. So work pretty closely with Kent on things, work with YG on things. And just yesterday we had a great meeting, I think, with KPMA, just talking about some of the challenges. So all of that outreach that we can do and communications, I think, is something that it's a huge area for us we can do a lot better on. So that's quite a bit of focus for us.
That's a lot for 13 people. And just so everyone in the room knows, the placer bubble is the 20-year anniversary of YESIB. congratulations, happy birthday. But that's also 2 cycles of a 10-year water license permit. And so because Placer is a family-based industry primarily, a lot of folks are there for multi-generations. And so they've maybe been there for a long, long time. And a lot of the assessments all came through. So the bubble is just, it's just an anniversary of when YESA was implemented. Janet on the phone. Would you mind telling us a little bit about some of the things that the YG team is doing to facilitate timelines that you're able to?
Yeah, well, I will start out by saying that I think everyone's aware that we're currently in the process of transitioning to a new government, and the new government does have a platform commitment to improve regulatory timelines. We're still waiting for a minister and a mandate letter, so it's early to say exactly what that will look like. However, Mineral Resources began implementing measures to improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of our systems well over a year ago. One of the things that we're doing is taking active steps to integrate technology into our systems to help improve efficiency and accuracy. As Karen mentioned, some of our systems are quite old and not the most efficient they could be running. So we're looking to update those. We've also brought in additional staff um, to help manage the plaster bubble and the backlog of permitting that we are dealing with. Most people are probably aware that in the spring, the government implemented some regulatory amendments that allowed us to extend permits as long as consultation was as consultation had occurred, that we could extend permits under these regulatory amendments. We brought in staff people to help manage that, so we weren't taking away from the team that we had working on the regular permitting process. And we have been working really diligently with in-house with other branches and units within Yukon government and we are receiving increased support from people like Strategic Alliances Branch, Aboriginal Relations Branch, and Major Projects Yukon. Those aren't teams at YG that most proponents or industry would normally interact with, but they've been doing like a really wonderful job of providing background support and helping Mineral Resources to manage some of our overarching issues so that we can continue to focus on the backlog of permits. And generally, we're trying really hard to work with YESA, with Water Board, with the other parts of the permitting regime to help find efficiencies where we can.
Okay, thank you. I'll stay with you, Janet. What do you wish you had? Well, if you can speak to it, because I know you're in caretaker mode. But what would you wish that you had the ability to do, but you can't because of the regulatory, swim lane that you're in, or what's outside of your swim lane that you wish you had a little bit more influence over, if you can speak to it?
Well, I can talk to some aspects, certainly. And although the permitting side of our legislation is relatively newer, we have a lot of challenges integrating the older portions of our legislation, particularly the tenure systems, into a modern context. Thankfully, we have a really strong team that includes our mining recorders and policy staff who work really diligently to interpret the older parts of our legislation and integrate them into a modern context. But that's not always a smooth process, and it does pose some challenges for us at times when we take a system that never could have envisioned the technology or the way we travel or kind of any kind of the modern context and try and merge those things together. So that is a challenge that we work with right now, that our legislation is our legislation and we need to find ways to fit it into the system that, or the context that we exist in now.
Thank you. I'm going to put you on the spot, but anecdotally, can you give an example of something like that? Because you've given me some examples over the past that's like, oh, I never even thought that that would come up across, like, especially in the mining
Sure.
recorders.
Certainly. One thing, this is very specific to Placer, um, but in order to be able to stake more than one claim at a time, you have to use something called a placer lease. Placer leases were invented and added to the Placer Mining Act in 1928 as a way for prospectors to be able to explore larger pieces of ground. That's not necessarily reflective of mining in a modern context where we do need larger pieces of ground to be able to effectively mine. And so we have rules around placer leases that were intended for, one or two guys with some shovels. And we are using that system now to be able to give miners access to adequate ground to enable them to mine a creek or an area effectively. So there's lots of challenges about the extra steps that the miners might have to take associated with the placer lease compared to a system where they could just apply for the size of a parcel that they needed.
Thank you. That's a great example. Because I think it's important when we're talking about legislation and frameworks to also bring it, like, anchor it. And what are we doing here? Karen?
So a few things that really sort of are limit our ability to be quick to respond in timelines. The Waters Act, talk about legislation, requires that any public notice or notice of public comment that goes out has to be advertised in a newspaper. And that's a little outdated, and we only have one now. Well, we have a couple, but anyways, that requires us to hit timelines for 2 days before to get this into advertising and line it up with a board meeting. And it sounds a bit trite, but it actually causes lots of headaches for us in terms of getting things through the system. Placer regs require that placer applications are out for 25 days for public comment. That's a long time, and certainly adds to the timelines, especially when we're trying to deal with renewals for spring season and everything. The water board is at the end of the process, so we get squished pretty hard on licenses expiring and decision documents and the timing of those things coming out. We have no control over that, and despite having great relationships and calling people and asking good questions, that usually backs the board into a corner in terms of timelines, so that's a real tough one. One of the other ones that always comes up is, and we're working on it, is the terms and conditions and decision documents and how those are written and what they say. Sometimes we get completely new ones. Sometimes we think it's going to say something and it says something different. And I've seen the board go through lots of discussion about what those terms and conditions mean and how to interpret them into the water license. So that's something we don't have control over either.
Thank you.
Yeah, from my point of view, we actually have no ability to, and we're not involved in the conversations around making changes to YESA, our legislation. And I think specifically looking at the regulations at this point in time, 20 years in, would let us maybe adapt and focus our assessment resources and the territory's attention onto maybe a smaller subset of projects or a different subset of projects that warrant more attention. I think like the word faster, timely, like faster is used a lot. I guess I think it's more timely and effective and predictable process that's like transparent, because like we were like created through like years and years of negotiations for like a public tool for YESIB to support like modern land claims in the point of view that we can actually achieve sustainable development for everyone. So YESIB's here for everyone in this room, no matter what side of the table you are on, but weighted in very like heavily negotiated important aspects of it. So I think a lot of times people just say like, oh, YESIB's in the way, YESIB's in the way, but we are this neutral body trying to facilitate the sustainable development conversation. And if we could change the regulations to focus more on different aspects of projects or different types of projects, that could be a big help.
Thank you. What do you wish you were better at, as YESIB, not as Kent, communicating to proponents? Because Kent's great.
I do mumble a lot, so I could maybe stop doing that. I think I made that joke last year, actually. Apologies. Um, I think. Sorry, what's better?
How would you? What do you wish? What do you wish you were better at communicating to proponents?
Oh, I think renewals is a big one. There's two sides of that conversation. We've done this for 30 or 20 years now. Nothing's changed. However, everything around contextually has changed in society, environment, whatever the case may be. It's a very hard conversation because, like, sure, the mine plan's been the same, but permafrost slumping over here has like impacted this, and forest fires here. And those are things that we need to tackle as YESIB, not just the project and the reality of it. It's all that contextual side. If there's not a land use plan fully implemented, if there's consultation issues, that all comes through us. So even though the project's the same, everything around it, it changes, and that's where we need to spend our time every couple of years, 10 years. And on that point, fun fact, you don't actually have to come to YESIB for your permit length. And I think that could help a lot. So for plaster, for example, you don't have to come to YESIB for 10 years. You can come for 20. You can come for 1,000. Huge risk there, just a heads up.
Can you explain that though? The huge risk piece about the 1,000-year license?
Yeah, I'll just like generally speaking with respect to time, the further you go out, there's more uncertainty. Therefore, it's harder to present mitigations or come up with mitigations that are confident to work. Therefore, the process could be more strenuous in people's views. But there is that ability to like change up the numbers, I guess.
So it's like an impact, the time and the impact gets conflated.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Karen?
Sure. Actually, just on the topic of the plaster bubble, because we just talked about this yesterday, there is the option for plaster miners to apply for something that's not just a 10-year license, like Ken said. And the idea being that if you want to get yourself out of the plaster bubble, apply for a 7-year license. Like, break up the bubble for us, because it's going to recur again in 10 years if we don't do something about it. So that's my pitch. As far as things to communicate that we could do better, not up on the board there, but one of our additional staff right now that we have is a grad corps person. And it's a great training program. We've got a wonderful person in it, and she has an interest in communications. So we've been having lots of conversations internally about how to better explain what we do and the information that we need. But for applications and applicants coming in, we want to better communicate that please come in earlier, so that you're not in the situation of having your license expire. And then the importance of providing complete information for us. If it's not complete, then we get into the game of the information request back and forth, which can take months, and then that lines up with board meetings. And if you want to talk about timelines getting extended, give us good information, and we can get your application through. So that kind of a thing, I think, is really important for people to understand.
Thank you. And just one sec, Janet. Again, the plaster bubble came up, and this is the Geoscience Forum, which is a very quartz-based program. But this is important for everybody because it's the same people reviewing those applications, and 86% of the volume through YESIB and probably higher through the Water Board are placer applications. So it's everybody's concern, regardless of where you intend to mine. Janet? What do you wish you were better at communicating to proponents, or your team?
Well, there's a couple of things that we are trying to address. So Mineral Resources has been asking for more plans from proponents, and we're working quite diligently right now to put together guidelines for required plans so that proponents have a better understanding of what kind of information that we need from them to move through the plan approval process in a more expedient way. So that's something that I wish we could communicate better that needs to come from us. And the second big thing, Mineral Resources works really hard to ensure that the process we follow reflects our understanding of our consultation requirements in order to meet our legal obligations, but maybe more importantly, to address First Nation concerns in a meaningful way. And I think it's important for all the parties involved in the assessment process to know that First Nations are partner governments. They are not stakeholders when we consult. The same way that we work, Minerals works with DFO as a partner government, that is how we work with First Nations. That doesn't mean that it always goes smoothly or we always have the same mandate or, um, but it does mean that they are a partner that we're working with, and we are obligated to address any of their concerns meaningfully. And so we want industry to understand that that consultation process, it has to be defensible in court and upheld when it's scrutinized. And we need to do our due diligence so that operators aren't impacted by any potential court action where it can be demonstrated that we haven't done that due diligence. And that's something that when I know industry can be frustrated about the timelines that consultation takes, but we are doing that to ensure that there's no negative impacts for any of the parties.
Thank you. Um, just a reminder, if there's a project that has multiple affected First Nations, that's multiple consultations, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thanks. Karen, what steps are you taking to work more effectively with other governments and groups?
That's a great question, Brooke. It was about just over a year ago, actually. It was Brooke, Kent, myself, and Kelly Constable, who's a former director of MRB. We sat down and we started trying to figure out, this is about the placer bubble, but just in general, that we needed to work together. And I think in the past, that maybe hasn't been the case between all of our agencies. So certainly being open to that and talking to people. We're pretty regularly in touch on things. What else are we doing? We had, as a result of this, last December, we brought together our staff from all of our groups and had a big sort of workshop that happened at the Westmark, or whatever it's called now. And it was really about the who are you and what do you do kind of thing, and trying to build that understanding. Water board, we're small, we're kind of off on the side, sometimes thought of as a bit of a black box, wanting to break that down a bit and just communicate better. So we've done that. We committed to doing more things like that, and then things happened this year that got really busy, like dealing with the placer bubble and the White Horse Rapids generating station public hearings. So we're a little off track on that, but the commitment's still there to try and work together and just share that information between our agencies. And honestly, when things were going on this spring, still on the placer bubble, Mark Meyer, who's now the director of MRB, would call me and we could have conversations about where things were at with decision documents, and I don't think that that's really happened before. So really just trying to build those relationships and serve our clients really well.
Industry loves that. Do more talking, it's great. Kent, what's YESUB doing to work more efficiently with other governments and groups?
Talking a lot. Yeah, for a couple of years now. So previously at YESUB, we never had a dedicated communications employee or focus, and we do now. And we've really been leaning into just explaining what we do and always being there for a conversation, positive, negative, constructive, deconstructive, whatever the case may be. We're a public process, so we should be there and open and transparent on what we do and reachable. So we're trying to do that. And that's kind of leads into community relationships as an organization. So making sure, like we have 6 districts across the territory, making sure that the managers of each district are able and are supported to be in the field to understand what's going on in their neighborhoods, to meet with nation governments, community groups, to feed that back into the organization. And then First Nation government specifically, we're looking into, we have a very legally drafted consideration of rights bulletin and how that's actually considered in assessment. We're trying to, we are working with First Nation governments to try and plain language that, to really make it clear how rights and title are considered in our process and relied upon for consultation. Recognizing we don't do consultation, but we do feed into it. So we want to be able to make sure everyone that's involved, that we can work together so it's clear, and then build off from that.
Just a little bit of work. Great. And Janet, what is YG doing to work more effectively with other governments and groups?
Well, I think my comments are going to be fairly reflective of what Karen and Kent have already mentioned.
Great.
We're working really diligently to try and break down those silos that government is so infamous for, and work more effectively within YG. We're working more directly with other departments and other governments. We're also taking opportunities for relationship building kind of outside of the formal processes, which helps to allow for better communication and collaboration within the formal processes and more effective communication in those formal processes. MRV has been working with other groups to better understand how we can coordinate our processes, and we're striving to reduce any kind of adversarial processes that make our working relationships really challenging. And as somebody who's been working in Yukon within the regulatory framework for mining for almost 20 years, I do have to say, like, the strides that we have taken um, between governments have been so significant, and I think is so positive. The relationship that Yukon government used to have with Waterboard compared to the way we can have conversations now, they're not even on the same page. They're not even in the same book. The improvement that we've seen, that's just one example of the improvement that we've seen. And so we're really striving to carry that forth and keep going with that with all the other governments and groups that we work with.
Thank you. I agree. I think it's really easy to focus on challenges and problems and things that aren't going well. And Yukoners do a bad job of patting themselves on the back and acknowledging that maybe we're not doing everything terribly, and there are some things that are really great. And some of the relationships that have built that I've seen in the last decade have been phenomenal. So that's a huge win, and I think we need to be a little bit more proud of ourselves. But I'm also very sunshine and rainbows. So my last formal question for you guys all is, do you think new minerals legislation is going to have any significant change on this issue of time? From your perspective, not being a part of the new mining legislation work.
I have a non-answer. I don't know, to be honest. The board, honestly, has just been so wrapped up in dealing with the business of licensing that before I got there, there was a working group of board members that were putting together their thoughts on how this could go. And there have been some internal opportunities for me to plug into it. I haven't been able to make any of them because of board meetings. So that's my honest answer.
Fair.
For YESOB, we provided comments like many other agencies and people in the territory. And whenever the YESOB review kicks off, let's chat about that. Other than that, I'll let people involved speak to it.
Okay. Janet?
I'm not really in a position to say when new minerals legislation will be implemented, but I can say that the new government has committed to completing the legislation. And of course, the new legislation is a great opportunity that could help us address many of the issues that we deal with. And Mineral Resources Branch as a whole is really looking forward to being able to provide our depth of experience with the existing legislation into the team that's building that framework when that opportunity arises.
Awesome. Thank you. We have just enough time to take any questions from the audience, or not any, but we have 5 minutes. Are there any questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, throughout this process, what portion of effort is put into the economic impact for proponents versus like some of the constraints that you guys have discussed?
I'll jump in there. So YESA mandates us to look at significant adverse effects, and I've had this conversation so many times. I think that would be a fairly large conversation for when YESA does open up the positive aspects of a project versus the negative. So right now, we do hear through public comment periods, as well as proposals about the positives of a project, community, economic, whatever the case may be. In the past, we have like summarized those within our reports, but they're not flowing into like our determinations since we're only looking at significant adverse effects.